Okay, thanks everyone who submitted last week's assignments. I know there's a few people that for various reasons, and that's life, have submitted late. If you've submitted late, I haven't actually had a chance to mark them. I'm supposed to have a nice quiet day today, and typically it's turned into a busy one. But we're going to look at simple messaging and establishing comms today, and security. So we've got 2 lessons. There's nothing massive really from last week that came up in terms of the assessment questions. People pretty much seem to be getting the hands of things. If anyone struggled or anything, now's the time to shout. Good. If you do have any questions or anything just comes up, then just drop us a note, or just ask at any point really, and we're here to help. So I'd rather you ask lots of questions than sort of come out of this not being super concrete on all the information and stuff. Those of you who notice the numbers that all the lessons are will see that we've skipped one, and the lesson that we've skipped is the intro to the PRR, the postal rail radio. The reason being is that we don't have it physically here, and I didn't really want to, you know, we could teach some of it with pictures and stuff, but I don't think that there's much benefit in that. It's much better for you to just have the whole lesson when you're back face to face with the kit, and that way you know, you're going to be able to benefit from it. But one of the things I wanted just to touch upon in that lesson is that's the first time the cadets have had hands-on with the radio, and you'll find that they'll probably be a bit excited by that and probably mess around a little bit, but you can use that as a really good learning point, because the next 2 lessons and sort of beyond a little bit, we're going to be starting to talk about voice procedure and how to actually communicate effectively on the radio. So you can refer back to that previous lesson where no doubt they all messed around with it, and personally, I, especially if it's more junior cadets, kind of give them 5 minutes to go and mess around on the radio, because it's low power, and you know, it proves the point, which is they all try and transmit at the same time. They can't hear properly, they can't get messages along, and it's all a bit of a faff. But we can refer back to that. You know, later on when we're starting to talk about discipline and security and accuracy, we can refer back to, remember that time when you all messed around on the radios and nothing was effective and they were effectively useless. Then we can talk about that. So it's just those little things that are worth bearing in mind when you teach this to your cadets. What, you know, how are you going to do it? How is your personal style and things going to work on it? But also, you know, what works well. So we're by the end of this lesson, you should be able to construct and send a simple radio message for intra-section communications. So we've just taught them the PRR, which is a small intra-section level radio, as in it's for your riflemen to talk to fellow riflemen within the section. So, you know, all these lessons now, we're in the 1-star world, are teaching those 1-star cadets to be able to effectively use that radio, so they're actually useful. It's a useful bit of kit for them to take out in fieldcraft lessons. Establish communications using a radio. If you can't talk, it's pointless. And why? Well, you know, to make sure that your radio is working, and so you can communicate effectively to the others in your section. It's the same as a weapon. You know, if we give a cadet a weapon, they need to be trained how to use it. Otherwise, they're just carrying a very heavy bit of metal around with them out in the field. So we'll look at radio messages. We'll look at the general format of a radio message. So this is really quite basic stuff. And then we'll look at a radio check. So how we do a radio check and what satisfactory and unsatisfactory calls look like. So just let's look at generic radio messages. So radio messages follow a standard format, and it's similar to a phone conversation. So, for example, hello, Bill, it's Ben, where are you? So this is really simple, you know, how you would have a conversation. The first thing you're going to do is say hello to the person, identify who you are, and give the message. But obviously saying hello, Bill, it's Ben gives elements of coil away, because we can start looking at our order at that point, because we're starting to identify people. So instead of using that, we can use call signs. And we can use those call signs instead of the real name or appointment. And that helps hide that information, the elements of coil, from the enemy, because we can just use standard call signs. So the radio is a simplex, and simplex means that you can either listen or transmit, and only one person can transmit at a time. So multiple people can't talk at the same time. So because they're simplex, we also need to let the other person know if and when we expect them to reply. And that way we can have that conversation where we're not trampling on top of each other. And I'm sure you guys have had experience in the last few weeks, especially if you've been working remotely and on Zoom calls and stuff, that even on this high-tech system, if everyone tries and talks at the same time, it just doesn't work. So you might have had to come up with processes of how to know when one person's finished talking and when it's your turn to talk. It's a really similar thing. So, call signs. Call signs are a combination of letters and figures used to identify a communication station, an organization, or an individual on a radio net. And that's quite important, and you might find that might come up on the assessment sometimes. That it's not just used to identify one person, a specific person. It might be used to identify an organization. So it might refer to, say, a section. Or a comm station, specific comm station. So maybe later on, if you went more advanced, you'd like look at things like rebroad stations, so rebroadcasting stations, and that might be an example. With call signs, we always speak the letters phonetically, and the figures are always pronounced digit by digit. So we always say those letters phonetically, and we always give the figures digit by digit. For example, the call sign would be pronounced Alpha 12 Bravo. And this one would be pronounced Whiskey 20 Delta. At this level, thankfully, you don't need to work out any call signs. So at 1-star level, you don't really need to work out any call signs. They'll be given to you. So your call signs would be allocated to you and others in your section. So you'd be told what your call sign is. You don't need to try and work it out. And you should be giving your call sign at the beginning of every transmission, unless it's the start of a new conversation. So we'll look at the start of a new conversation in a second, but it's really good practice to give your call sign at the beginning of every transmission. Later on, especially for you as an adult, and I wouldn't encourage necessarily your cadets to do this unless they're sort of much more advanced, is if you've got good comms between someone and you've had that initial to and fro where you've talked and you've started your transmission with your call sign, you might want to drop your call sign to keep your transmission shorter, but only if you know you're working with another call sign that can understand you and that you've got effective comms. Otherwise, you revert back to always starting your transmission with your call sign. So pro words. Pro words and endings are words that we use that have a specific meaning that help us keep our transmission short. Because you don't want to be talking on the radio for too long. It's, well, it uses up power, it uses up your battery life, but also the longer you transmit, the more likely the enemy is going to be able to hear you. So here's the first pro word we're going to use, which is hello. And that's used to alert the net that you're starting a new conversation. So hello gives everyone on the net an awareness that you're starting a new conversation and you're going to be talking to someone. Roger is a way of saying, I've received your last message. We use over as a word for I've finished transmitting and need a response. Okay, so that's I finished my sentence and I want you to reply to me. So we're still having a conversation, but I finished my little part for now. And then we get out, which is I finished transmitting and do not require a response. And I always liken this to you're having a conversation with someone and you hang up. You say what you need to say and you've hung the phone up. You finish that call and that conversation is over. Yeah. Out to you is similar. I finished talking to you. I don't need a response from you, but straight away, I'm going to talk to another person. So I finished talking with that person, and I'm now going to go and talk to someone else. And that one gets used quite a lot if you're, say, the control station. You're the one that's kind of looking after everything. You might talk to one person, finish talking to them, and need to straight away talk to someone else. Wait out is another common one. And that's, I finished talking to you and need time to get an answer together. So that might be, you know, I've got your message, but your message might be something that you can't answer straight away. So that might be, maybe you got asked a question that you need to go to your section commander to get the answer to. So you could say wait out, which means I'm done. I know what you said. I've got that, but and I'll get back to you. Or it might be that you're just on the toilet. So we've got some examples, and hopefully technology works. We should have 2 people who should be able to read these out. Now, normally in your classroom environment, what I would say is what you might do, depending on the maturity of your cadets, is keep the PRRs. You've just taught them how to use them. So if they're the kind of cadets that are not going to find them too distracting to have them on them the whole time, then give them the radios and get them to use the radios. Pick your cadets and get them to actually read these examples out, and then we can discuss them afterwards. Because there's 95 of us in the call, and I don't want to randomly pick people because it's quite difficult to do, I've planned this. So Ben should be taking the Alpha 12 Charlie, and yep. James should take Alpha 13 Delta, and this will give you a bit of an example of what a simple message will look like. What you'll find with these is that before the element that the call sign speaks is their actual sign first. So you see their call sign with a colon, and then the person reads everything beyond that colon. So fingers crossed this might work.
Hello, Alpha 13 Delta. This is Alpha 12 Charlie. Move now. Over.
Alpha 13 Delta. Roger. Out.
Well, amazing, it worked. So you can see that Alpha 12 Charlie started the conversation with hello. That's the pro word to start the conversation. He said, hello you, this is me, and then given the message, move now. And they've ended it with over, so that means they want a response from Alpha 13 Delta. So Alpha 13 Delta's replied, first with their call sign to identify themselves, then Roger, because that means I've got your message, I've received your message, and out, because they don't need a response. There's nothing else to that conversation. Alpha 12 Charlie has asked Alpha 12 Delta to do something. Sorry, Alpha 13 Delta. And Alpha 13 Delta said, yeah, okay. And that's it. That's the conversation done. And to be honest, a lot of your messages on a radio net are going to be like this. Really simple kind of, hello you, this is me, do this. And that person replying, yeah, all right. And there's that. So let's look at another example. So Ben will be Tango 42 and James will be Echo 30.
Hello, Echo 30. This is Tango 42. What is your ETA at my location? Over.
So this time he's asked a question that he might not have the response to straight away.
Echo 30. Roger. Wait out.
Okay, so Echo 30 has come back and said, right, I've got your message. I know the question you're asking, but I don't actually have the answer to it. Maybe he's not the person who's knowing how long it takes to get places, so he's having to ask the driver, for example, the vehicle. Once he's got that information, because he said wait out, he's ended the conversation. So he needs to start the conversation back up. So it'll look like this.
Hello, Tango 42. This is Echo 30. My ETA is 13:45 hours. Over.
Tango 42, Roger, out.
So he's gone away, he's got the information, and he's come back, started the conversation again. Hello, you, this is me. Given his message, his ETA, and given over so that Tango 42 can come back, confirm that they've received the message, and end the conversation. Does anyone have any questions on that? So the real take home is we use call signs instead of names or appointments or organizations. We always start our messages or at the beginning of a conversation with hello you, this is me. And we start our transmissions afterwards with our call signs. We say over if we want a response at the end of our transmission, and we say out if we don't want a response. We never say over and out because that is conflicting. Because over says I want a response and out says I don't want a response. So you'd never say over and out. Really American. And you can throw things at people. So we'll look a little bit more about figures later. But in this example, with someone asked about, I forgot who it was who asked just then, about figures, we're just assuming at the moment that all the transmissions we're making are in good condition. So if they're in good condition, we're just going to talk normally because it's easier to understand. It's much easier to understand than it is to break these things up. Cool. So we've looked at simple messaging. We've looked at how to just pass the simple messages together, have that little initial conversation. And now we're going to look at establishing comms. Now, before we send any traffic over the net, stations might need to check communications. You might need to make sure that your radios actually work. You're all on the right frequency. Your headset's not broken. You put the batteries in the right way around, all those kind of things. You wouldn't normally do a radio check mid-exercise. You do this at the beginning to make sure everything's good, and then you can kind of assume that generally everyone's good. And there might be the individual case that might go a bit wrong. Someone's radio might break, but generally you don't normally conduct them. The initiating station, so the one who wants to do the radio check or start the radio check, will use the pro word radio check to request readability reports from the called station. Okay, so they'll do a radio check with someone, and then the called station will reply with their call sign and the appropriate pro word. And there's 3 pro words that they could use. OK, and this is the only time you'd use OK on transmission is within a radio check. So OK means transmission is satisfactory. I can understand and hear you clearly. Difficult means transmission is workable, but with difficulty, requiring extra care. So maybe they're sounding a bit muffled, or there is interference on the radio, or maybe you're just at the edge of being in range. So you'll find with these radios, less so the PRRs, but more so the 710s and upwards, is that as you get further and further away, the signal strength will decline and the noise floor will come up every time someone transmits. So every time you hear someone talking, you'll hear more of a shh kind of noise in the background. And that hissing noise will get louder and louder as the signal decreases. And therefore it's harder to understand. But you might find that it's just because someone's eating their microphone or because they've got, they're not speaking clearly. Normally it's signal though. And then the last one we're going to look at is unworkable. And unworkable means I'm unable to receive message traffic until communications between us has improved. So that means that the signal strength is so bad that it's just not usable. And it might be so close to the kind of edge of being workable that it's just unworkable. Okay, and then the initiating station replies with the appropriate pro word. They respond in the same way because remember we're transmitting 2 ways. And it might be that one person's radio is stronger in power or got a better antenna than the other one, and that means there might be good comms one way, but not the other way. So it might be that, say, Zero, the person who's running the net with his big, powerful radio, everyone's able to hear them, but he's not necessarily able to hear everyone else, or she. So in this example, we've got satisfactory comms, so everything's really good. Well, Ben is Delta 10 Charlie, and James is Delta 11 Delta.
Hello, Delta 11 Delta. This is Delta 10 Charlie. Radio check, over.
So he's initiated the radio check. It's all good. So Delta 11 Delta comes back.
Delta 11 Delta. OK, over.
OK, so it's good that way, and then we'll see what it's like the other way.
Delta 10 Charlie, OK, out.
So satisfactory comms both ways. Everyone's happy. Delta 10 Charlie has responded and out because there's nothing else to be said. The conversation is over. That radio check is finished. So let's look at unsatisfactory comms. So Ben is Charlie 10 and James is Delta 21 Charlie.
Hello, Delta 21 Charlie. This is Charlie 10. Radio check, over.
Delta 21 Charlie. Difficult, over.
Charlie 10, unworkable, out.
So in this instance, Delta 21 Charlie heard Charlie 10, but the signal was not good. It was difficult to understand. So he came back with difficult, but Charlie 10 said, "No, your response was unworkable. I can barely hear you, or I can't really hear you at all," and therefore says it's unworkable. And in this instance, that means that one of them, and normally it would be the Delta 21 Charlie, now needs to do something about it. So that might mean they need to move, they need to up the power on their radio if they can, they need to change their antenna or do something, because no comms is a bad thing, right? And you can tie this back, if you've got more senior cadets, you can tie this back to platoon harbour areas. If you're occupying a platoon harbour area, in your final recce, what's the thing you do? You do a radio check. And if you go there and you do a radio check and you have unworkable comms, then you're going to have to choose somewhere else to have a platoon harbour if you can't make it work. So you should now be able to construct and send a simple radio message for intra-section communications and establish comms using radio. Does anyone have any questions? This is right at the beginning, the first kind of bit of introduction to voice procedure. And lots of things tie back to this, and we'll kind of refer back to bits and bobs on this as we go along. Good. Cool. I will skip the final confirmation since you get that on my lovely Google presenting thing. So, security. So we've now started our looking at voice procedure, and we want to tie a lot of what we do back to the elements of COIL, and also we want to look at some other mnemonics. So by the end of this lesson, you'll be able to explain the requirements for security in radio communications, describe interception and how we can minimize it, recall radio appointment titles, and describe the construction of a call sign. And then finally, we want to find the correct fixed call sign element given a role or appointment. Why? Because the more information you give away to the enemy, the more they can use it and exploit it and disrupt your whatever your task is. So we'll look at security, we'll look at interception of information, we'll look at the different appointment titles and call signs, and then we'll all go and have a gin. I don't know about you, but well, so voice procedure is designed to provide us with security, and that's security to prevent the enemy from gathering intelligence from our transmissions, from gathering those elements of COIL that we talked about last week. Accuracy, to decrease those errors and to decrease confusion in transmission. And discipline, to ensure the radio net is controlled. And this is another great point to talk back to, if the cadets are messed around on the radios, how ineffective it is, and how you do need that discipline, and how if you don't transmit clearly, it's not going to be accurate, and how if you do transmit the wrong things, then you're going to be giving information to the enemy. And we put that into a mnemonic of SAD, and that comes up quite often. So this might be quite an important one for you to remember. It's kind of one that sort of comes up on assessments quite often. So remember it with the mnemonic SAD: security, accuracy, discipline. And a lot of the stuff within voice procedure, if not everything, comes back to SAD. So it's one of those things, we talk about COIL a lot, we talk about SAD a lot. Those are the kind of things that are really good to refer back to. So let's look at security. So radios are a vital part of modern day communication and provide an excellent way to communicate on the battlefield. Looking at history, the history of comms, and could you imagine conducting stuff without being able to talk to each other? It's great. Using radio is a really good way of having quick comms on the battlefield. However, those radio communications are the least secure means of communicating. Every time you transmit, the energy comes out of the antenna of the radio, and anyone can receive it, in the same way that anyone can tune into Radio 1 and listen to Radio 1 in their car. And it's subject to interception and recording, which is impossible to detect or prevent. You can't tell who's listening to your transmissions, and you can't tell if they're recording it. And you can't really stop them from doing that. If they're if they're receiving the energy that's coming out of your antenna, there's nothing you can do to really stop them from getting that. So all radio transmissions are subject to interception, which is the act of looking for, listening to, and recording our transmissions. So that might just be as simple as the enemy putting an antenna up somewhere and just receiving as many frequencies as they possibly can, and listening to them and recording them. Analysis, so taking those recordings or taking that information from those transmissions, examining them and interpreting them to extract as much information as they can, to see if they can gain elements of coil, which they can then use against us. And finally, deception. They can then use that information to deceive us. They might record our transmissions, rehash them all, and then transmit them themselves, sending completely different messages, completely confusing us. So some people refer to this as IAD. This is something that comes up, again, it's quite often comes up as a question in the assessments. So it's good to know that, you know, all radio transmissions, they're subject to interception, analysis, and deception, and they follow on from each other. As a side note for you guys, from the instructional perspective, there's nothing to stop you from doing this to your cadets as part of an exercise. If anything, I'd say it's really good. So, you know, if you later on, especially once you've got cadets that are trained up on this, want to utilize it, then you totally can. Why not? You know, why not set it as a tasking for your enemy to try and intercept, analyze, and deceive the opposing forces? Why not do that in your field craft exercise? Nothing. There is absolutely nothing to stop that. So, radio communication is a valuable source of intelligence for the enemy, and also for us, remembering that we could do it the other way around. Communications are monitored by the enemy both in peacetime and war, and that's really true. You know, we are constantly listening out to our allies and our foes to gain intel about them. You know, that's the entire reason really that GCHQ exists, and that's the kind of thing that is happening all the time, because information and data is really important. And you know, I don't know if you've been reading recently about the kind of worry about the NHS tracking app, which personally I think is a little bit unfounded. But you know, data is important, and data has power, and communications is that kind of data. So it must be assumed that every transmission made, even during exercises, is intercepted and evaluated by the enemy. So this can provide current information about our fighting capabilities. So, you know, if everyone always has, if you refer to someone instead of a call sign as their name, then you now know about that person. You can go and find some more information about that person, and maybe you can work out their fighting style, which means if you ever see them on the battlefield, you know how they work, and you can exploit that. So that intelligence can be used by the enemy to influence command decisions. The enemy will seek to find our 4 key areas of intelligence, which we've talked about before with the acronym COIL. So those are the kind of things that they're looking for. And so you always have to think about how do you try and stop those elements of COIL: combat effectiveness, order of battle, intentions, and locations. So we need to prevent the enemy gaining useful information from our radio traffic. And we're going to begin to cover those kind of ways that we do it. And as you go more and more through the CIS syllabus, there's more and more things, you know, tools in our toolkit that we can use to find that, like backcode and things like that. Anyone got any questions about that? Great. So really, we're talking about how can we communicate effectively with our allies whilst stopping the enemy from being able to gain any information out of those transmissions, full well knowing that they will be able to hear them because they can, because it's a radio transmission. So let's look at interception. How can we defend ourselves against it? Well, I mean, the easiest one is you impose radio silence. You don't transmit. If you don't transmit, then you can't be intercepted. We could impose electronic silence. So the difference between radio silence and electronic silence is in radio silence, we're just listening. And in electronic silence, we don't even have our radios on. So, you know, that might be because there's a fear of being able to be intercepted because there are electronic signals that are given off by radios or by any electronic equipment that might be being listened into, etc., etc., etc. In the example of radio silence, at least you're listening, so you might be waiting for a transmission from someone to to move or something, or to start an attack. Whereas in electronic silence, your radios aren't even on because there's a fear that they might be able to actually hear you, which they can, because electronics make noise, vibrations amongst other things. So more commonly used, we can defend ourselves against interception by avoiding unnecessary transmissions. So the fewer amount of transmissions we make, the less chance we give the enemy to actually intercept those transmissions. So the fewer they are, the better. And therefore, let's not use it for means that aren't critical to the battlefield environment. You don't have a conversation about what you're going to do next week. And minimize our transmission lengths. So the shorter our transmissions are, the less likely that it's going to be intercepted. Now, there is a lot of technology now that's very good at scanning frequencies very quickly and picking up on things, but we still want to keep these things as short as we possibly can. So the ideal within VP is that our transmissions always need to be less than 20 seconds. The more advanced we go, we might look at ways of, if we had a really long message to transmit, we've got long message procedures. How do we break it up so that our transmissions are shorter? We can also defend ourselves against interception by following procedures. So the more we follow our procedures and use things like pro words and have good VP, the shorter our transmissions will be, and also the less individual will be. And that's quite important, because if you have a way of talking on the radio that is different to everyone else, then you can identify yourself. And suddenly the enemy can use that information over days and weeks and years of different times you've transmitted to work out who you are, and maybe to work out what your role is as well. We can change frequency. So the more we change frequency, the more the enemy is going to be confused, because then they've now got to find which frequency we're on. And modern radio systems that some militaries might use actually change frequency very rapidly all the time, even in the middle of the transmission. And that makes it much harder for the enemy to track what frequencies they're on, and therefore be able to actually hear what the transmission is. Our radios don't do that. Or, we could just use an alternative means of communication. So we could use our field telephones, which we cover in the 3- and 4-star syllabus, or we could send someone, a dispatch rider, a physical runner. Using different comms makes it hard to intercept, something that might need to be physically intercepted. Has anyone got any questions about interception? And that might give you some clues about things you might, as instructors, might want to use to intercept in an exercise scenario to prove your points, maybe. So let's look at radio appointment titles. So radio appointment titles are not code words. Some people kind of think they are, but they're not. They are separate to that. Here's an example. There's only actually a few we use now. There used to be lots more, but we kind of reduced them down to stop confusion. So Sunray, that's the title we use for the commander. Now remember that there's no information given about what net we're working on. So we might be on a section level net, or a platoon level net, or a company level net, or even a battalion level net. And Sunray always talks about, Sunray is the title for the commander of that sort of viewpoint that you're looking at. So if you're on a company level net, Sunray would be the company commander. If you're on a battalion level net, it's going to be the colonel. And we could further clarify that with the following words: my or your. Okay, so my Sunray would talk about who's my commander. Your Sunray would talk about who your commander is. And then we use Sunray minor to talk about the 2IC, the second in command. So those are our two main radio appointments we use. So let's look at call signs. Call signs are a combination of letters and figures used to identify the following on a radio net. So a comm station, a specific communicating station, an organization, an individual, sorry, and that's it. So as if there was another one. And all the call signs look very similar, and that's done on purpose, because we're back to looking at our security, hiding elements of coil and stopping the enemy from being able to analyze the intercepted transmissions. Because what they can then do, if the more we standardize these things, the harder it becomes to differentiate between, say, a section level radio net and a battalion level radio net. Because if all the call signs look the same, they can't necessarily work out what level it is. And the enemy is going to be far more interested in a battalion level net than it is necessarily going to be interested in a section level net. So they're comprised of two elements. One part changes, and the other part is fixed, which is never abbreviated. We never abbreviate a call sign. The call sign system consists of a permanent fixed call sign prefixed by a daily changing call sign indicator. And the fixed call sign element comprises of 2 digits in the range of 10 to 14, 20 to 24, 30 to 34, or 40 to 44. And then a suffix between alpha and foxtrot may be added to the fixed call sign element, but doesn't always have to. So you might have seen in those examples we did earlier that some of them had a suffix and some of them didn't. So here's an example of a call sign, which is Alpha 12 Bravo. So alpha is the call sign indicator, and that would change each day. And later on, I think it's in 3-star, it might be in 4-star, we'd cover exactly how you work out what that call sign indicator is. But at this level, we'd expect you to be given that by whoever's planning your comms. And then your fixed element, which in this instance is 12 Bravo. And you can see that that one has a suffix on the end. So in general, there's some common call signs that are always given. So 0 is allocated to the control station. So 0 is always the person who is in charge of the net itself. So not necessarily of the people on the net, but they're in charge of the communications net itself, the control station. 10, 20, 30, and 40 are normally the primary subordinate stations. And the commander whose unit, or the unit whose net it is, will be 0 alpha. So on a company level net, the company commander would be 0 alpha. On a platoon level net, the platoon commander would be 0 alpha. And their primary subordinate commanders would be 10 alpha, 20 alpha, 30 alpha, and 40 alpha. In general. So by following the single system, all nets sound similar, and that reduces individuality. So what I was talking about earlier is it becomes difficult to differentiate between a section, a platoon, a company, a battalion level net, which makes it much harder for the enemy to drill into, information. With the limited number of call signs within the fixed allocation means there might be some duplication. And the way we achieve this is by using different call sign indicators. So that's if we get really big, then we might have different call sign indicators, and that can differentiate between people. And all the call sign indicators are calculated using a backcode sheet. We don't cover how, in this course, we don't cover how you would calculate them. So that's something that you'd expect your whoever's managing your net to give you what those call sign indicators are. So unless there's a need to avoid the confusion, call signs should always just be transmitted without a pro word. They're obviously call signs because of how they're made up. You'll get really used to hearing how they are. So you don't need to preface any transmission really with the word call sign unless you think there might be some confusion. So if there's a need to avoid the confusion, you can use the pro word call sign to identify that the next thing you're about to say is the call sign. So we're going to take a look at this, which is the call sign matrix. And this is the bit that captures a lot of people out in terms of what it looks like and trying to work stuff out and reading it. So this is something that can often be a bit of a tripping point with some of your cadets. So, and I get it, because at first look, this looks really daunting. Like, what does it mean? How can I work it out? So let's drill into this a little bit. Oh, we go. Right. So hopefully you should be able to see my mouse. Okay. Right, so we can see at the top of the call sign matrix that we have our control stations. So 0 is always going to be control. And as we were talking about earlier, 0 alpha is the commander. And then we've got 0 Bravo, 0 Charlie, 0 Delta. And there's no one assigned to be 0, 0 Echo. Because there's no one underneath, that means there's no one there. So that call sign isn't used in this particular call sign matrix. And then we have all of our substations. So because we know this is company level net, we can we know therefore that 1 0, 2 and 2 0 and 3 0 are platoons. So 1 0 is going to be the platoon 1's HQ. And we can drill down further into that. And so 1 0 alpha, because they're contained within the box that has 1 0 at the top, 1 0 alpha is going to be one platoon's commander. Hopefully that makes sense to everyone. If we go down one more level, we'll get to our sections. So call sign 1-1 would refer to one platoon, one section. And we can see that starting to be dotted around in here now are other people. NCO is actually, their call sign would be 2-1 because they're within the box, and alpha. So they'd be 2-1 alpha would refer to the signals NCO. And this comes up in the assessments. Ooh. This comes up in the assessments quite often, and people miss things. So they might miss, for example, that the CQMS is down here, or the CSM's over here, or the Land Rover OC is over here. Okay, so they do exist around, and this catches people out. And so you end up with someone saying, "Oh, what's the signals NCO's call sign?" And they just put alpha. And that's not right because they're within the 2-1 box. So they would be 2-1 alpha. Does anyone have any questions about that? Anything? Or cool. So normally, if we're teaching this with the cadets, I'd get them to go and work a few out. You've got some on the assessments. They might be a little bit sneaky. You might just need to remember things like fire control groups. So you've got Charlie Fire Team and Delta Fire Team sat on there. So who heads up Charlie Fire Team? The section commander. So if you were looking for the section commander of, say, 3 platoon 2 section, then they're going to be in here because they're 3 platoon 2 section, and the section commander is going to be Charlie. So it'll be 3-2 Charlie. So hopefully you should now be able to explain the requirements for security and radio comms, describe interception and how it can be minimized, recall radio appointment titles, and describe the construction of a call sign. And then also using that call sign matrix, you should be able to find the correct fixed call sign element of a given role or appointment. Can you look it up on that matrix? Anyone got any questions about that? Good. Okay, so there is some assessment questions for that. There are some questions for that. Now, I'm aware we've got 13 minutes left today, so we can, if you want, we can crack on with a bit of the next lesson. We're definitely not going to get through it, so there won't be any assessment with it this week. But I wonder if it's just worth digging into a little bit of the next bit, which covers accuracy, so looking at how we can stay accurate over the radios. You give me one session. So hopefully we've not gone too quick for anyone, but if we have, then have recorded it, so you can come back and look, and if there are any subsequent questions that come up, do let me know. So we've looked at security, that part of SAD. We're going to move on to accuracy. Strangely, these kind of follow on from each other. So by the end of this lesson, which we won't finish today, but we'll do a bit of it, you should be able to apply correct speech technique, recall the rules for spellings, figures, and their exceptions. So when would we spell, when would we use figures, when would we not? We'll look at abbreviations. And abbreviations, yeah. So why do we do this? Because we want to be accurate on the radio. The more accurate we are on the radio, the more we're going to be understood. We're going to keep our transmissions down. We're going to be able to communicate effectively. So we'll look at speech technique, pro words, spellings, figures, and rules, aids to brevity, and that's it. But as I said, I don't think we'll crack all of this tonight. So voice procedure is designed to provide the fastest and most accurate method of speech transmission. We want to transmit quickly because we want to stop reduce the chance of the enemy intercepting us. But we want to make sure it's accurate because we want to make sure that our friends will be, our allies will be able to understand what we're saying, and therefore, that's the whole point of communicating. So our messages should always be planned, brief, logical, and thought out before you press the pressel. And quite often you find that cadets and adults alike hit that pressel, that transmit button, before they really know what they're going to say. And generally that means that they don't end up being accurate and they don't end up being brief because they're thinking about what they're saying at the same time as saying it. So what I'd really encourage you to do is to write out in full the message that you're going to transmit before you transmit it. Certainly for a while, because it will make sure that your voice procedure is good, you use the right pro words, and you reduce your errors. And encourage your cadets to do the same. It's no point just pressing the pressel and making up what you're going to say as you go along, because that causes a lot of errors and longer transmissions. So think about what you're going to say before you hit the pressel, before you start speaking. We can also use noise-cancelling microphones, and they'll aid accuracy as they reduce background noise of the environment. The headsets we use both on the PRRs and the 710s and the 715 are really good. They're noise-cancelling, they sound great, they can deal with wind, all sorts. They're actually very nice microphones, and they generally transmit really clearly. But if you put rubbish in, you'll get rubbish out. So you kind of need to make sure that you speak correctly and use good speech technique. So we use a specific speech technique, and it can be remembered by the mnemonic RSVP. So this is another one that's good to remember. It's one that comes up a lot in the assessments, and it's one that we refer back to, and that you should refer back to when you're critiquing your cadets transmitting. So let's look at the R. So the R stands for rhythm. And by that, we mean that we should use short sentences and we should use a natural rhythm. The more you kind of break up your sentences, which generally I tend to do when I talk about this, because then it makes it really confusing, it's harder to understand. And the more naturally you speak and the natural rhythm that you have that sits within your sentences that you talk, the easier it is to understand. And the shorter your sentences are, again, the easier it is to understand. So speed. So our speed should be slightly slower than normal conversation. If we speak too quickly, it's much harder for the receiving station, their brain, to keep up with the information that's being given to them. Bear in mind there might be distractions. Those distractions might be happening around them, but those distractions might also be because the signal strength is not high. There might be some noise in the background that they're trying to process. So we speak slightly slower than normal conversation. Volume. Now you think you need to shout down the radio, but we just talked about microphones. They're actually really good. So we just need to be normal, unless we're on whisper, which doesn't, strictly speaking, exist on any of our radios anymore. And you can find that you can speak normally down them and you can whisper down them and they still transmit really clearly. If you shout down them, you have a chance of doing a thing called overmodulating. And overmodulating basically makes you sound like a robot, and it's really difficult to understand. You start clipping the signal and it's just not good. And then finally we talk about pitch. So pitch should be slightly higher than normal if you've got a lower voice. If you've already got a high voice, you don't need to start talking like a chipmunk. You just need to talk as you are. The reason being is that higher frequencies generally transmit better, and they're easier to understand. Low, grumbly, grouchy frequency voices are actually tend to be a little bit more difficult to understand on the radio, and actually generally don't transmit as far. Generally. We'll look at pro words. I'm just conscious of the time. So pro words or procedural words are words with a defined meaning, and we've already talked about some of them, haven't we? We've talked about hello, Roger, out, over, radio check, call sign. Those things are all pro words, and there's loads of them. And as you go through voice procedure, we're going to learn more and more as you go through all of the different levels. And they help reduce transmission time, and they aid accuracy. If we all know what the pro word means, we don't have to explain it, and therefore, you know, they're going to help you be accurate. Everyone understands what Roger means. Roger's much quicker than saying, yes, thank you, I've received everything you just transmitted to me. And it's easy to understand. So Roger is a good example. Out, you know, this is the end of my transmission and no response is required. We've shortened that all to out. Radio check, which we've talked about. Has anyone got any questions about pro words? Cool, we've talked about the phonetic alphabet. There's a nice revision bit here, which we haven't talked about. And that gets us onto spelling, which is where I'm going to stop it here because I'd rather spend a little bit more time talking about spelling. But we'll go on to spelling and figures next week. And that is some of the kind of things that we'd use to help, especially if we've got difficult working conditions. So we were talking about radio checks earlier, and this would be a really good example of, oh, right, I know I'm talking to someone that have got difficult, not okay comms, and therefore I need to start thinking about spellings and figures to slow my transmissions down and to make them easier to understand in difficult working conditions. So I think I spied that there are some questions about the call sign matrix. So I will happily put that back up again. Cool, so we're looking at some examples. So Dan's putting some examples up now. So for example, let's look at the most recent one, 3-2 delta. So, okay, we've been given 3-2 delta, we want to work out who they are. The first thing we're going to do is find the 3-2 box, so that's here. You see the 3-2 box. So that means we know, and then the delta, we're going to move down to our second half of our section. So 3-2 is going to make them 3 platoon, because they're in the third column, the 3 on it. 2 would mean they're 2 section, because we can read that up here. And then delta means that they're going to be the delta fire team. So that's going to refer to the 2 IC of 3 platoon, 2 section. Yeah. And then an example of just looking up a sort of generic one, if you would say, oh, where's the CSM in this call sign matrix? You have a look up and down the columns and the rows. We can find where CSM is. We can see CSM sat there. So now we're going to work it out. So they're in the 3-3 box. So they're going to start with 3-3, and then they're next to alpha. So their call sign would be 3-3 alpha. Cool. That's got you. Yeah, it's often a bit of a light bulb moment with the cadets when they first sort of see it, because it is daunting. Like you see this big sheet with all these letters and numbers on. It's quite a daunting thing to look at, but when you kind of click that you need to look within the box, and it's the top left bit of the box, and then add the letter that's to the side of what they are. You know, there are some that kind of standardized, some that kind of move around. These are the things that you would rely on your you know, your CIS officer, your county or CIS officer to kind of make for you, or if you're in the CCF and you need some support with this, then talk to your brigade signals CIS advisor, and they'll be able to help you make these kind of things for one of your exercises, perhaps. Same thing with call sign indicators. They're daily changing. They're calculated off your backhoe sheet, really. But again, if you need support on them, those are the kind of things you just want to go up the chain of command. They're the ones that have had a bit more training on those planning of comms and stuff that should be able to help you with it. Yeah, Tracy, exactly. You'd get a sheet like this, or hopefully you'd get a sheet like this, or you might have something that, if it's a much smaller net, you might have something that's even smaller. So you might just have a list of all your call signs along the left and who's who along the right, and that, yeah, call it your otherwise known as the day sheet. Normally has things like frequencies on as well, and other bits and bobs that would be useful. Yeah, your daily changing prefix. You might have, there's all sorts of little bits and bobs that might be useful. If you've got different radios across different frequencies, it might tell you what powers you're going to use today. It might tell you whether you need to use a mast or an antenna. Or it might tell you if you've actually got radio silence on. So ideally, you get a day sheet. Has anyone else got any questions or anything? Russell, so in this suggestion, let's just say our today's prefix is Foxtrot. We just add it to the front of your call sign. So in the example of our CSM, their fixed element is 33 alpha. If today the call sign indicator was Foxtrot, they would just be Foxtrot 33 alpha. If tomorrow the call sign indicator is whiskey, then tomorrow there'd be whiskey 33 alpha. So you can see the fixed element isn't changing; it's just the prefix is changing. Just to look at that, I think it's That's the right one. Yeah, so this is your fixed element here. This is the bit that you'd find off of your off of that matrix, and your call sign indicator you'd be given each day and change. Has anyone else got any other questions? Good. So you should find the assessments are launching any second, and I'm sure I'll get about 1 million emails in a second when I've realised I've pressed a button incorrectly and that's not letting me get in. But hopefully they're all good for you. Hopefully you're enjoying it. Yeah, as Dan's saying, like, you know, we're right at the initial bit of voice procedures, the first bit of voice procedure you're covering. So some things might seem a little daunting, and as you get on, you'll realise why these things are. You know, the day you do backco and learn about call sign indicators, you're like, oh right, okay, that's where it is. I'll hang around for another 5-10 minutes. So if you've got any questions, let me know. If not, then I will see you next week, same time, same place. Thanks, everyone. So in terms of how long, we are, might be able to. So we're on 4:10 at the moment. You've got discipline. We'll obviously skip the 7:10, calling, answering, no play, corrections and repetitions, radio net and comms. I think that in reality, it's probably 2 more sessions, maybe a third, before we're done. So we're looking at 2-3 weeks. The basis in terms of depth of this assignment that we'll end up getting is to the point where you can confidently operate really as a section regularly, and teach your cadets to do that as well. You know, and as an adult, maybe starting to push at more of the platoon level stuff with support of your with support of maybe a senior. But you know, we're really talking about being able to use those radios out in the field effectively in a section, get good comms, and talk back to your platoon. So that's kind of where we're getting to. And as Dan also alludes to, also for you to be able to run that as a basic safety net. So you know, being able to coordinate with other adult instructors on an exercise or an event, and also to teach your adults the adult radio user course, which has elements of this, and we'll cover exactly what right at the end. So yeah, that's the kind of thing there. Yeah, basically it's to get you to a stage where you can use those radios really effectively, use them out on exercise, but also use them as a coordinating sort of basic safety net. And that's great because it means you could do things like, I mean, it makes fieldcraft exercises really useful. So, you know, as a set of adults, it's so much easier than having to rely on mobile phones with crappy signal and that kind of stuff. Oh, done it again. Give me a second for the assignments. Stuart, once you've qualified, you'll get access to that website that I just showed, this portal that connects signals, or you can get it on the through Defence Gateway through the cadet portal that way. With the permission to get on assignments, give me 2 seconds and I'll change the setting that I changed a million times already. Cool. If you try and re-access those assignments, you should be able to get them now. Sometimes it still comes up as you can't get into it. If you just close your web browser and reopen it, you'll find it works. And I will literally double check. Does this to me every time. So strangely, every time I post these assignments, it changes a setting that means none of you can access it. Let's go back and manually change it. Just really double. So Alf, you should find in the handout or the worksheet for security and call signs. So that's L409. You should find, amongst other things, you've got a copy of that call sign matrix. That helps. Good point on those. I would hope in your instance that if you were given a call sign matrix like this, and it would only use abbreviations that you understand. So the whole MO, medical officer, ambulance. In terms of the assessment questions that come up, I don't think any of them are ever really that obscure. So there's not a huge worry about you know, who might be, but you know, COI is short for company, so that'd be your company to IC. And then so the half thing is the bit that goes together. So this is talking about half sections, as in as in Charlie and Delta Fire Team. So the same bits of how you do field craft. And sometimes this is a bit of a light bulb moment for people because they're like, oh, that's why it's Charlie and Delta Fire Team. Why is it, you know, why has it never been Alpha and Bravo? So yeah, so these are talking about the two halves of that section. So of 2 section, 2 platoon. This would be the first half Charlie and the second half Delta. If anyone's got any more questions, otherwise I might call this a day.